Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello everyone, it is currently about 3:06. We'll just go ahead and round it up. 3:10, Friday, January 16th, is that right? 15th. January 15th. I can't do numbers apparently. January 15th, 2021. God, it feels good to say that number, even if it has been a show the likes of which is best described by words I can't say. My name is Adam, and it is time for this, the 101st trip down the Homeward Path. I'm back to flying solo. There's no one in this car beside me to deride me, and I promise I'll stop with the song references in a minute. But first, I've got a few questions. Are you a fan of Magic the Gathering? I mean, I really hope so, because you're here listening to me ramble on about it week after week after week. But in spite of that, along with that, rather, do you have something else going on in your life that's more important to you? Listen, I know the feeling. Job, career, partner, children, any and all of the above. Like, I'm right there with you. If you listen to episode 100, you got to meet my wonderful wife, and then we have 3 children, and I work 42 plus hours a week. So I feel your pain. Other things have to come first. In spite of that, are you still seeking every avenue that you can to improve and sharpen your Magic skills on the odd chance that you get that one weekend where you really get to show what you're about? Well, if that sounds like you, hope you got some creatures on the battlefield, because we're about to be trying to devour the competition. But first, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor is PureMTGO.com. PureMTGO.com is one of the largest collections of Magic the Gathering content on the web. Like a brain short-circuited in the middle of a word. I haven't had that happen in a while. Largest collections of Magic the Gathering content on the web. Listen, if it's Magic related and you want to find it, you can probably find it there. Everything from Pauper Leagues, Commander, top tier competitive 60 card formats, and Theory and Limited, and I don't care what it is, it's probably got some stuff on Pure MTGO. There's just a lot to choose from a lot of fantastic creators, and you are doing yourself a disservice if you don't check it out. And speaking of fantastic content from great creators that you are doing a disservice by not checking out, head over to the rest of the network, ConstructiveCriticism.com. Listen, we just added Sam Black to do a limited podcast. It's called Drafting Archetypes. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. It is absolutely phenomenal, and I can't wait to put some of these ideas into practice once Kaldheim hits Arena and MTGO respectively. I'm eagerly awaiting the chance to use it. But there's other content on the network too. There's Spencer and Michaela on Mythic Cast. There's Spencer and Matt heralding the return of Constructed Clash. There's Mason and Allie with Constructed Criticism, and there's Christian and I believe it's Christian and Brad. I'm sorry if it's Christian and Brad. Yeah, my brain is non-functional today, y'all. But again, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not checking out the content on the network. That's just all there is to it. And while you're browsing the web, if you really do like this show as much as some of you have let me make it known you do, head over to patreon.com/HomewardPathMTG, and you can show your support in a very, very, very direct way. Listen, everything I make, every major piece of content that I put out is going to be free. Because if there's one thing I hate, it's good content behind a paywall. It's not any kind of a dig at the creators. I just don't have the money, and I don't have it. So I wanted to be someone who didn't do that. But if you like what I'm doing enough to help me keep doing it, head over there, become a patron, and I will see to it that it gets put to good use in some form or fashion. And with that out of the way, let's dive into our first segment. Our first segment every week is, normally at least every week. Last week was a bit of an anomaly, but it's not every day you get to do a podcast with your Magic playing awesome wife. So we're back to business as usual this week with Budget Spotlight. Now, Budget Spotlight is normally where we take a profile of common or of uncommon, rare, and mythic, and a commander focus card centered around the theme of the episode. But I decided to kind of shake things up a little bit this week for a few reasons. One, as we continue the color series that I started way back in episode 91, I believe it was. May have been right at episode 90. But as we continue that color series, branching out into the 3 color combinations, it is really hard to find remotely playable uncommons that are 3 colors or more. It just is. But even worse than that is it is really hard to find like good playable rares and mythics in 3 or more colors that aren't either prohibitively expensive or are just like a really loose definition of like playable and good investments other than in Commander. So with that in mind, I decided to make an effort for this part of the series as we're doing the 3 color combinations. We're starting with the Shards. I wanted to make this point, or this one, focus on 1 card from each color and then 1 multicolored card, regardless of rarity, that I feel like is undervalued and valuable to have in your collection, either from a gameplay or financial standpoint. And the first one we're going to talk about is the ambassador to one of the ambassadors of the game of Magic. It is one of Magic's most iconic, one of Magic's most defining cards, and that card is Lightning Bolt. Now, Lightning Bolt is, for those of you who don't know, a single red mana to deal 3 damage to any target. 1 red, 3 damage, no strings, and it's an instant. Now, Lightning Bolt currently retails, if you get any of the newer copies from any of the regular printed copies from M10, M11, or any of the reprints it's had in like dual deck series or anything of that nature, Lightning Bolt currently retails at about $3. Which, I mean, financially speaking, is just not bad. $3. So I have here in the notes, it is iconic, defining removal spell. And I mean that quite sincerely. It's obviously one of the first cards you see when you start looking at the history of Magic the Gathering. It's one of the most iconic spells ever printed that is still being used today, that has not been banned into oblivion or power crept by way of some other cards that neutralized it. Like, if you're playing Legacy, you've still got arguments you can make in favor of playing Bolt. If you're playing Pauper, you still probably want to play Bolt. If you're playing Modern, you want to play Bolt. You have to talk yourself out of playing Lightning Bolt. The fact that this card was standard legal while I've played Magic is nothing short of an absolute godsend, because I got to experience playing it a lot. And I love it. But it's not just a burn spell. It's primary application in most constructed formats. It's a removal spell first and a burn spell second. It's really important to remember that. 1 mana, 3 damage is great going upstairs, because if you got enough of those, you're way ahead of the Philosophy of Fire's curve. But when we're talking about 1 mana, 3 damage to any target, Like, this thing's trading up with a Bone Crusher Giant for 2 life. This thing's trading up with Goblin Chain Whirlers. This thing would be really stinking good in Pioneer if it were legal. But it would power creep like 5 other cards if it were. And it would probably make the burn deck too good. Or the Prowess deck, or the Rakdos, Luris, Croxa, the Rakdos Arcanist deck, I think is what they're calling it now. Regardless, like, this thing would be really, really, really good in Pioneer today, even though Pioneer has Uro and Croxa and Winota and all these other busted Magic cards that have come to define what power creep looks like in Magic these days. Bolt would still be very, very good. And to that end, it's a deceptively flexible Magic card because it hits Planeswalkers, it hits creatures. In conjunction with something like Soulscar Mage, it can shrink creatures, allowing your Soulscar Mage to, as I love to say, punch way above its weight class. Like, I could do an entire episode on applications of Lightning Bolt and its variants. That's how good and flexible this card is. So you can do way worse for $3. Like, even in Pauper, getting a set of these for $12 and it being, you know, somewhere around half your budget for your deck, you're still not upset about it. It's so good. So with that in mind, let's move on to our next card, which is Traverse the Ulvenwald. For those of you who don't know, Traverse the Ulvenwald is a single green mana. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal that card, put it into your hand. But if you have Delirium, which is 4 or more card types in your graveyard, you can instead search your library for a land or creature, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. And Traverse the Ulvenwald is currently sitting at a price of about $350. And that's about the time I noticed this little green sorcery was actually a giant lizard creature from the Paleolithic era, and I promise to only make that joke when it's appropriate. I mean, the amount of creative deck building it takes to make this thing good is not as much as it seems. Especially when you start looking into older formats that have the benefit of fetch lands, but even in Pioneer and Historic, where you have, you know, if it ever ends up in Historic, when they do either Pioneer Masters or like Gatewatch Remaster, I don't know what they're going to do to finish fleshing out the card pool for Pioneer. Like, if this thing ever ends up on Historic, like, it is 1 mana. If you can get different card types into your graveyard, it becomes Worldly Tutor that puts it into your hand. That's a really high ceiling. Like, really high ceiling. Go get any creature for 1 mana seems real strong. And just a tiny bit of setup. You know, the card types being what they are. Creature, artifact, enchantment, land, sorcery, instant, planeswalker, and tribal. I'm still not just dead sure why tribal got put in there, but it is what it is. Just the act of playing a land, thought seize your opponent on turn 1, play and activate Fabled Passage on turn 2, you've got 2 card types in the graveyard. Leave a Fatal Push their creature, that's 3 card types. Play and sacrifice a creature, that's 4. Now you can traverse for full power. Even something as innocuous as using Traverse to go get Grimflayer. Like if your low end on power level is going and getting a 4/4 with Trample that helps you fix the top of your library. And that's the fair application. That's one of the fair applications. You can do a lot worse than that. If you buy in, full bore and you're going Traverse for, I don't know, copies of Siege Rhino or Blink effects, whatever it is you're going to get, once you start putting real effort into this thing and it turns on faster, it gets even stronger. It literally goes from being Lay of the Land to being Worldly Tutor that puts it into your hand. Worldly Tutor costs a lot of money. This does not. And due to the fact that it has that ceiling near and around the power level of Worldly Tutor, it also has a ton of value in Commander shenanigans where everybody's playing artifacts and lands that go to the graveyard. Even if you're not playing fetches, you're playing stuff like Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, Ash Barrens. Things that fix your mana and put lands into your graveyard. So this thing can turn on there. And it can go get you dumb stuff. I don't know about you, but I really like being able to go get my dumb stuff. Especially in a format where I only get to play one copy of it. So, at its core, at its peak, this card is very, 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 very good. It's fair, but powerful. And you can do a lot worse for $3.50. Now, moving on, our third card is Boluses Citadel. In case you hadn't guessed, we did a red card, we did a green card, now we're doing a black card. Boluses Citadel is a little on the pricey side for what we normally do for Budget Spotlight, admittedly. But on both fronts, it's triple black and 3 for an artifact. I think a legendary artifact. Generally speaking, if you ever have more than one of these on deck, you are either winning or losing directly because of that fact, so it doesn't really matter. You can look at the top card of your library. You can cast spells from the top of your library by paying life equal to their converted mana cost instead of paying mana. And then you can tap Boluses Citadel, sacrifice 10 other permanents, and target opponent loses, or maybe it's each opponent, I can't remember. Target or each opponent loses 10 life. So, first and foremost, there's the obnoxious side of it, which is the pseudo-combo side of it, which we got to experience first in War of the Spark Standard in conjunction with the Explore creatures. If you can cast spells that gain life, this thing's dumb. Because from any, reasonably safe life total, you can not only recur your life total and keep going, you can buff it even more. You cast Wild Growth Walker into Jade Light Ranger if you're at 7 life. And you will gain 6 of it back. So you'll go up to 8. Because you spent 5 to gain 6 more. Well, then you cast another Wild Growth Walker and a Merfolk Branch Walker. Well, now you get 2 more Wild Growth Walker triggers. So for the cost of 4 life, you get 6 back. And then you just keep going, and you just keep going, and you just keep going. And then you attack with what you can, and then you kill your opponent. Because 10 is a lot. And that's the thing, that, similar to Traverse, similar to Lightning Bolt, when the most fair application of this card is play a bunch of stuff out of my library and maybe accidentally kill you. Card's probably a little too strong. Now, I know, it's 6 mana. I know. In most constructed formats, if it's 6 mana, it better win the game. But the fact of the matter is, this thing is just really, really good. And then you get to throw in the wombo combo, if you will, of playing it in the sacrifice stacks. Playing it alongside a card like Mayhem Devil. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, deal 1 damage to any target. So when you sacrifice 10 permanents to make them lose 10 life, you also deal 10 damage, and you probably just kill them out of nowhere. So that's probably going to get you there. That seems really strong. Really, really strong. It's a haymaker, and it can dominate the board, or kill the opponent outright, or do both. Like you're trying to dominate the board and you just kind of accidentally kill them. And as anybody who's ever played Commander can tell you, some of the most fun games happen when you just accidentally kill everybody. Like you weren't planning on it, you were just trying to do a bunch of stuff to crawl back into the game, and oops, everybody else died. So, it's got value in 60 card formats, particularly in Historic and Pioneer. But it's got a ton of value in Commander, where it can come down and lend its future sight, but even better. Because it allows you to trade the resource that you've got the most plentiful of in life total, in order to just flood the board with a bunch of stuff. And with any kind of an untap shenanigans, or with like Havoc Jester and Mayhem Devil on the battlefield, you can just obliterate tables. You can either stabilize the board and deal everybody 10, or you can, have you hit a Perforos, you hit an Avenger of Zendikar, you make a ton of damage. That gives you plenty of tokens to sacrifice for the -10, and that gives you plenty of permanents to dome them for a ton with the other stuff. Like, the leap from this card being very, very good to being thoroughly, utterly disgusting is really short. It's like leaping from one side of the sidewalk to the other side of the sidewalk. It's like stepping across a crack on a sidewalk. That's the distance you have to cover for this card to go from really good to stupid broken. So, you can do a whole lot worse for $6. And last but not least, we have our only actual multicolored card in, and this one is kind of a pet card of mine more than it is like a really, really stupid strong budget spotlight pickup. But again, it's in that $6 price range. It's chosen more with an eye on Commander than 60 card formats, but it has some legs in 60 card formats, in particular Historic. And that card is Corvold, Fey-Cursed King. Corvold is 2, a black, a red, and a green. And that buys you a 4/4 dragon with flying. Maybe trample, I can't remember, it doesn't matter. 4/4 flying dragon. And when Corvold enters the battlefield or attacks, you can sacrifice another permanent. And it says whenever anyone sacrifices a permanent, or as whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Corvold and draw a card. Are y'all kidding me with this thing? I mean, clearly, because it came out in the Brawl deck in Throne of Eldraine. This thing was designed with the express purpose of making people angry in Commander, because of how thoroughly it invalidates every other aristocrat-based commander in the format. Because there's just nothing this powerful. Prosh is like fine by comparison, but if you just play Prosh in the 99 of Corvold, it's even dumber. Because then you can kill 2 people. Either way, even if you're playing Prosh as the general, play Corvold in the 99 because it's stupid. In 60 card formats, this has one of my favorite unwritten lines of text on it. That being, if you untap with this thing, you're probably going to win. And I've experienced that before on the card Niv-Mizzet Parun, and it's something that I like to experience. To this date, I have lost a grand total of 1 game that I've ever played where I've untapped with Niv-Mizzet Parun in play. I would argue that the same thing goes for Corvold. I don't know that I've ever lost a game where I've untapped it with it. Like, I've gotten to untap my mana with this thing in play. And even if I hadn't, that doesn't say I lost every game where I didn't get to. Because the value it provides is immense. Tremendous. And yes, I just did the hand thing because I'm a horrible person. But, jamming this thing down in standard and sacrificing an afterlife creature, draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on it, end step, activate Witch's Oven, sacrifice Cauldron Familiar, make a food, put a +1/+1 counter on it, sacrifice the food, bring the Cauldron Familiar back, put a +1/+1 counter on it, draw a card. You lose 1 life, I gain 1 life. If there's Mayhem Devil involved, we're pinging down blockers, like that's 2 triggers. Untap. Tap Witch's Oven, sacrifice Cauldron Familiar, put a +1/+1 counter on Corvold, draw a card. It goes from 5 to dead, like immediately. There was at least 1 game I played where I played Corvold, and then the next turn it attacked my opponent for like 15. Like, the leap between that thing being a little bit of value and just accidentally drawing like 10 cards and killing your opponent out of nowhere is even less of a distance to travel than the Boluses Citadel analogy. And it gets better than that, because in Commander, the leap between an attack for 5+ and going full Voltron on the entire table, not very big. A card like Breath of Fury, for example. Breath of Fury enchants a creature you control whenever you attack. You can sacrifice another creature. If you do, the creature enchanted with Breath of Fury can untap and give you another combat phase. Well, then every time Corvold attacks, you also sacrifice a thing and put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. But wait. So that means 2 cards for every attack. And then you can draw 2 cards, which you can discard for Zombie Infestation to make tokens, which Corvold can eat for both Breath of Fury and its own ability. So we can just keep going. And it gets bigger with every attack. See where I'm going with this? It goes from aggressively fine to, oops, I killed everybody, really fast. So keep that in mind when you're evaluating things to pick up. Like Corvold, as a build around me commander where a lot of the core pieces for the deck are stupid stinking cheap, the commander itself being able to be that power level but still be right around the $6 price point, sorry, forgot my words. You can do a lot worse. I mean, it's just gonna annihilate some people, and I don't mean annihilator, although that's really funny with it. It's just gonna do a thing, and it's real good at that thing. Now, speaking of decks that do a thing, we're gonna move on to our second segment, and that's Brew of the Week. Brew of the Week is here, and this time it's more an abstract construct. As I put in, I said, as is becoming tradition on this show, this is more of an abstract concept than a finalized list. The core of this archetype is rooted in a very parasitic mechanic that is deceptively easy to build around, and that mechanic is energy. Yes, I'm talking about a Jund energy deck. Jund energy. Those two words do, in fact, go together. The core of the deck is Attune with Aether, Longtusk Cub, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and Harness Lightning. Because that core, when everything comes together correctly and you're not in a bad matchup, i.e. a combo deck where removal and gradually accruing card advantage doesn't matter, you do a really, really good job of dominating the board. Notably, Longtusk Cub can get out of hand very quickly, and you're in the right colors to keep things off the table that will get in the way. So the amount of pressure you can put on with a Longtusk Cub in Jund energy compared to Temur. Yes, I know Temur gets Rogue Refiner, so you can more easily do the like turn 3 Longtusk Cub's a 5/5. But for those of you who don't know, like, energy is a mechanic where cards give you energy, it's counters that go on you, and then you can spend it to activate abilities of cards that use it. Longtusk Cub makes an energy every time or makes 1 or 2 energy every time it connects with an opponent, and then you can spend 2 energy to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Glint Sleeve Siphoner, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get 1 energy, and then you can spend 2 energy in your upkeep to draw a card and lose a life. Attune with Aether is Lay of the Land that gives you 2 energy, and it was so good at producing excess energy it got banned. And then Harness Lightning gives you 3 energy, then you can spend any amount that you have to deal that much damage to a creature for 2 mana. So like, if you're capable of producing excess energy, this thing just turns into Terminate. But that core typically gets married to supplemental engines when you start talking about playing it in Jund. And there's a reason for that. I mean, you don't have the benefit of Rogue Refiner and cards like Confiscation Coup or Whirler Virtuoso to give you even more just play these things, get energy, sink energy, get a thing. So by that token, you are both less linear, but also a little bit less like starved for energy. So Engine 1 is a counters sub-theme, playing Winding Constrictor, Rishkar Pima Renegade, and potentially like Verdurous Gearhulk as a curve topper. I promise I know how to speak this language. Winding Constrictor notably says whenever a counter would be placed on a creature or player, add an additional one of those counters instead. So Attune with Aether makes 3 energy. Longtusk Cub connecting makes 3 energy, and then spending 2 energy puts 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So it goes from being a card that gets a little out of hand pretty quick to being a card that gets really out of hand like the turn it connects if you play Constrictor. If you are fortunate enough to be able to combine, Longtusk Cub on turn 2 into Winding Constrictor plus a removal spell on turn 3, that telegraphs a whole lot of damage. Like a whole lot. You can do a whole lot worse. And then you have cards like Rishkar Pima Renegade, which naturally gives you, like, you have a natural turn 4 kill with Rishkar and Verdurous Gearhulk because you can Winding Constrictor on turn 2. You can attune on turn 1 if you want to. That's fine. But you can Winding Constrictor on turn 2, Rishkar on turn 3, attack for 4, because Rishkar puts 1 +1/+1 counter on up to 2 target creatures, or lets you distribute 2 +1/+1 counters, so you can put 1 on each creature, and that gives you 4, because it puts 2 on each thanks to Winding Constrictor. Attack for 4 with Winding Constrictor, turn 3, or turn 4, you can tap I guess it wouldn't be a turn 4 kill, but a natural turn 5 kill anyway. Turn 3, you convert her as Gearhulk, which lets you distribute 4 +1/+1 counters. So you can put 1 on each of your creatures, which doubles to 2. So your Winding Constrictor is now a 6. Your Winding Constrictor is now a 6/7. Your Rishgar is now a 6/6. And your Verdurous Gearhulk becomes a 7/7 because you put the extra counter on it. And you attack for 6, and then on the next turn you have well more than lethal. You can, throw in this a Voice of Zendikar to put +1/+1 counters on the whole team. Like, this thing gets out of hand very, very quickly. You just kind of stick your foot in the ground and go get them. You apply massive pressure while you accumulate energy. And then Winding Constrictor in conjunction with your energy cards makes them better too. When Harness Lightning can take out a 4/4 by itself. When Glitsleeve Siphoner makes enough energy to draw a card every attack. Engine number 2 is Luris's Companion, slotting in additional threats like Voltaic Brawler, maybe even Aether Chaser to recur. The idea behind this line of thought is the energy core itself is fairly small and easily distilled. Voltaic Brawler applies additional pressure. Brawler, Cub, and Siphoner apply plenty of pressure. Aether Chaser can help you chump block or just give you something to do with extra energy every time it attacks. But you're more interested in this line if you are leaning into a more interactive variant. So if you're interested in cards like Thoughtseize, if you're interested in cards like additional removal spells to supplement your Harness Lightning and take some of the pressure off of it, that's the line you want to take, because your creatures do a better job of sticking around. Because even if they manage to kill them, if they don't do it with an exile spell, you can just get them back. So, that seems pretty good to me. Engine number 3 is the Electrostatic Pummeler package. And this one is a little bit of a darling for me, because with Electrostatic Pummeler, you have the capacity to just annihilate your opponent out of nowhere. Electrostatic Pummeler being a 3-drop, makes 3 energy when it enters, and you can spend 3 energy to double its power, or it gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is its power. In a format, in Pioneer at least, where we have access to Temur Battle Rage. In a format in Historic, where we have access to a card like Unleash Fury, which can do that in addition for 2 mana, double its power. In Pioneer, you also pick up Become Immense, +6/+6. So you can play that first, make it a 7, double it to 14, then give it double strike. Like, just kills people. It's like playing Infect. But why would we look to play Jund instead of Temur or one of the Marvel decks? Well, access to discard spells in post-board games keeps opponents from reliably going over the top of you, which is a kind of a trademark for Jund decks. You have to make sure they can't go over the top of you, because by and large what you're doing is trying to make them play a fair game of Magic, and if they are ever allowed to not have to play a fair game of Magic, you are not likely to win that game. It's better in longer games due to its impetus on Siphoner as its primary energy sink in longer games. You are using energy to get very real card advantage. Siphoner becomes your primary outlet because you need that thing to sit there on the table and keep drawing you cards. And it's also infinitely more fun to tune and tweak due to a lesser focus on the Temur energy that we all know and loved, where you are all in on the best cards. You are just playing the best cards. Well, in Jund, your best cards are the beaters. The Siphoner, the Cub, the Harness Lightning is a removal spell. But I love it. Because there's something honest and pure about playing fair magic every now and then. And that's what Jund Energy gets to do. You get to play fair magic with just that little tinge of unfair that the energy cards allow you to take advantage of. So anyway, moving on into our main topic this week, I want to talk about the Shard of Jund, because, I mean, nobody ever does that, right? So what is Jund? Well, in the lore, Jund is one of 5 shards of Alara and the locus of black, red, and green mana. It's sort of a case study in predation left unchecked. Life on Jund is about one factor: power. Survival is not guaranteed. The most dangerous predators rule the roost. It's kind of like a volcanic jungle with massive valleys carved into it by the lava, and into those valleys go the non-dragon sentient beings. You know, you have random creatures running around all over. It's kind of a, survival of the fittest to the exclusion of anything else. Just raw, untamed power and power and might of nature. Only the strong survive and the strong eat the weak. Well, how does this translate into gameplay? Well, mechanically, it gives us their printed mechanic Devour, which is devour with a number after it, and when this creature enters the battlefield, for each creature you sacrificed to devour, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So, for example, the card Mycoloth had Devour 2. So for each creature you sacrificed in order to devour with Mycoloth, I think it was Mycoloth, I genuinely cannot remember, you would put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So frequently it was just one counter. One devour trigger would give you 2 counters, and then every upkeep it would make you 2 sapperling tokens with which to devour further. Or there was Fledgling Dragon, I can't remember the name of it, but it would devour 1, but then when it entered the battlefield it would deal X damage, where X is the number of goblins it devoured. So on and so forth. It was a really cool, unique mechanic. And it was a really good depiction of a strong predator growing even stronger by, consuming weak prey to increase its power. Trope-wise, when Jund is designed to play together, which is to say when those 3 colors are supposed to be together by design in the set, either in a multicolored set or in something like Eldraine, where incidentally there's enough synergy that you want to play all of it. We see an abundance of sacrifice enablers and payoffs, along with a bevy of efficient threats and answers, and that's kind of one of the key signature tropes of Jund, right? Is a combination of really good threats and answers and some form of synergy to build around. But as such, Jund decks tend to heavily fall into the mid-range spectrum, but tend to move to both edges with some degree of regularity. Which is to say, they're very rarely just aggro or just control-ish mid-range decks. They're very rarely like all the way one way or the other, but they tend to be leaning one way or the other. They tend to be either more reactive or more proactive, depending on the constraints of the formats where you're building the deck. And in Commander, the common Jund tropes are Aristocrats and Ramp, as these are heavily supported on Jund Legends. They also tend to heavily use the Graveyard as a primary resource. All that to say, Jund is by and large a mindset. It's a mentality. The idea that at least early on, I've got either this engine that allows me to outlast you until I can get to my cards that are more powerful than yours, or I'm using cards that are more powerful than yours to get to a point where I can. find an engine that allows me to outlast you. So, like, at its core, at its peak, Jund is less the combination of colors and more the strategic implementation. You know, Brad Nelson once famously referred to the mono red aggro deck during Hour of Devastation Standard with Heart of Kirin and Goblin Chain Whirler and Chandra Torch of Defiance and Glorybringer. Brad lovingly referred to that deck as mono red Jund because by and large that's what it was. It had the best removal spells, it had the best creatures, and it had the best sort of engine cards in Heart of Kirin and Chandra. And even when it comes to Commander, you look at some of the Jund commanders. Kresh the Bloodbraided is just one of the better payoffs for playing sacrifice synergies. He gets really stinking big and punches your opponent in the face. You look at a card like Prosh, Sky Raider of Care, makes a bunch of tokens. You sacrifice those tokens, he punches somebody in the face. You look at Corvold, Fakehurst King. Every time you sacrifice stuff, it gets bigger. And what do you do with something that gets big? You punch your opponent in the face. And yes, technically there are Jund sacrifice like combo decks and aggro decks over the spectrum over the years. Be it like Jund Death Shadow or I'm drawing a blank. But by and large, Jund tends to fall heavily into this mid-range category. They're very linear. They're like linear in their non-linear behavior, which is to say there's very rarely like a ton of synergy going on, and more likely it's just kind of incidental that it happens to play along with what you're interested in. So some notable decks over the years for Jund. Jund Cascade was kind of my introduction to them, and it was for a lot of people because Jund as a name didn't exist until Shards of Alara in fall of 2008, I believe. That sounds right. And Jund Cascade was that deck after Lorwyn rotated from Standard, and we had Jund as just far and away the best deck in Standard. It was kind of the purest form of the deck, and I used purest in air quotes because it's actually made up of actual Jund cards from the set that Jund was introduced in. Shards of Alara, Conflux, and Alara Reborn, respectively. It operated as an aggressive mid-range deck capable of blistering starts with Bloodbraid Elf, Putrid Leech, Sprouting Thrynax, and Garruk Wildspeaker. Like, in matchups where your opponents weren't interested in trying to interact with you, you could just Putrid Leech on 2, Sprouting Thrynax attack you for 4 on 3, Bloodbraid Elf into Blightning, dome you for 3, make you discard 2 cards, attack you for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's really fast. And then on turn 5, you would Garruk, make a token, you've still got more bodies, or you would Garruk, untap, removal spell, keep up the pressure. You know, you were capable of just smashing your opponent's face in very quickly if you were left unchecked. But it also played the long game really well thanks to a bevy of 2-for-1 threats like the aforementioned Bloodbraid Elf. But moreover, the top of its curve with cards like Siege Gang Commander, which we know and love today in Historic because of its propensity to flood the board with threats, and Broodmate Dragon, which is 4 mana, buys you 8/8 worth of flying power spread across 2 bodies. Or 6 mana, rather. 6 mana, bought you 8 power and toughness, flying, split across 2 bodies. 6 mana. That's really good. And then the aforementioned Blightning being 1 a black and a red, deal 3 damage to your opponent, that player discards 2 cards. So, you know, you could take advantage of card advantage by way of the fact that between those and then your 1-for-1 removal, you could kind of grind your way through any given matchup based on the fact that you just didn't run out of stuff. And this deck dominated Standard until Rise of the Eldrazi gave blue-white control enough tools to keep up. And that was when they got Gideon and Marshall Coup, I believe. Or maybe it was just when they got Gideon and then they just decided they were done trying to make the bad counterspells work. But like by and large, this deck was omnipresent everywhere. To the point that I played a free entry win-a-box tournament right after I moved back home. And I let Brett borrow the deck that we brewed, and I played Jund. And I kid you not, I played tap land on turn 1, untap on turn 2, play another land. Play Putrid Leech, and my opponent went, oh, it's Jund. It's Jund. It's like, yeah. Yeah, it is. So, like, this was the deck that everybody else had to beat. And yes, other decks had good weekends while Jund was in the format. There's no disputing that. Ironically, they tended to be Naya-flavored mid-range decks that tried to just get a little bigger at the expense of winning the 2-for-1 battle. But by and large, this deck was at its peak for an entire year. Like, from the moment everything rotated out from Lorwyn, and Fairies wasn't there to keep pace with it, and the control decks lost a lot of their counterspells, this was the thing to do. The next one I want to talk about is Jund Food from 2020 Standard. And some of you are still having a level of Magic-induced PTSD from this deck. To clarify, like, this deck was silly, okay? You were very much green, black, red, but that red splash made all the difference with Mayhem Devil and Corvold. It was built around Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, and Trail of Crumbs as your engine. And thankfully, because all of those cards are super cheap, you can get into that quickly and then steamroll your opponents with the inevitable barrage of card advantage you get from it. It allowed you to grind out aggro and control alike, and it played, eventually at least, it adopted Boluses Citadel as a sort of combo finish to win out of nowhere. So to put it in perspective, like, Cauldron Familiar single-handedly was a thorn in the side of non-Embercleave aggro decks. Like, you couldn't not play Embercleave in your aggro decks and expect to reliably beat Cauldron Familiar without going into stuff like, you know, Winota into Agent of Treachery and that kind of stuff. Because you could just stonewall the biggest thing that didn't have evasion. Constantly. And then if Mayhem Devil was on the battlefield, you would sacrifice it, chip in for damage, keep going. This deck was just really, really good at what it did. And it was so good, it eventually got Cauldron Familiar banned in Standard. And then last but not least, we have to talk about the elephant in the room if we're going to talk about Jund. And that is Jund with no modifiers whatsoever in Modern. So this was one of the earliest decks in Modern's inception. Ironically, it was not nearly good enough when Modern first became a format, which some would argue is the case now. But now, the thing about Jund in Modern now is it is like the perfect encapsulation of what fair Magic is supposed to look like in an unfair format. You try to take away the thing that goes over the top of you with Thoughtseize and sideboard cards. You play efficient threats, you play efficient removal, and you play some amount of disruption. And you just cross your fingers and hope it's enough. Like, Dark Confidant links arms with a bunch of 1 and 2 mana removal spells to keep your hand full and keep your life total from plummeting too quickly. A card like Wrenn 6 does a really good job of creating a sense of inevitability by giving you, making sure you hit your land drops. It makes sure you have something to do late in the game if it survives. If you decide to go down the Lurrus's companion route, you've got that at your disposal. All of it's on the table for you. So, whatever the case is, it's a deck designed with the entire purpose of trading 1-for-1 and then getting that card advantage back with cards like Dark Confidant and Lurrus and Wrenn and 6. That's how Jund wins. It is a mindset. It is an attitude. Not always a healthy attitude, mind you, but it is both of those things. It is a mindset, an attitude. It's a style of play as much as it is a deck. And at the end of the day, that's really what Jund is about, right? It wouldn't have the pedigree it did if it wasn't successful in many, many iterations. So, that's all I got to say about it this week, everybody. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, send them to me on Twitter. I'm at HomewardPathMTG. Send them to me on Facebook. My name is Adam Spain. You can find me in the Facebook group for the show, the Homeward Pathfinders. If you're a patron of the show, you are obviously in the Patron Pathfinders Discord, where we're talking about episode topics. We're at $3 or more a month, you get your deck pushed to the front of the line for the Brew of the Week segment. And at $5 a month, I will write you your very own episode about the thing that you want, and we will collaborate on it. With all that out of the way, that's all I've got for this week. I'm going to kind of bankroll some dad jokes for another good episode with either a guest co-host or a more fitting topic. And with that, I will leave you with my traditional parting words. Listen, everybody's going through stuff right now. Times are utterly terrifying and stressful. So with that in mind, when we're dealing with people online, we have to remember Peter Capaldi, 12th Doctor, words of wisdom. Never be cruel, never be cowardly. Remember, hate is always foolish. Love is always wise. Always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind. So, laugh hard, Jund them out, but be kind. And we'll catch you next week. Be safe, everybody.